There is a secret about prayer that most people have never truly been taught. And because this secret has been misunderstood for generations, millions of people spend their lives praying from a place of waiting, hoping, and quietly feeling powerless. From childhood, many are taught that prayer means asking something from a higher power outside themselves. When life becomes painful, they ask for relief. When fear appears, they ask for protection. When they feel lost, they ask for guidance. When they desire love, success, or abundance, they ask that it be given to them. Yet hidden beneath this pattern is an assumption so subtle that few people ever question it. The belief that what they desire exists somewhere outside of them, distant, unavailable, or controlled by a force that may or may not choose to respond. Because of this belief, prayer slowly becomes an emotional ritual of lack. Each time a person asks for what they want, they unintentionally confirm that it is not yet theirs. Each request quietly reinforces the feeling that the life they hope for is still far away. Over time, prayer begins to feel like speaking wishes into silence, hoping that something beyond their control might eventually answer. But the deeper truth of prayer is completely different. And once it is understood, everything changes. Prayer in its most powerful form is not an act of begging life to give you something you do not have. Prayer is the activation of reality through the state of being you embody. It does not begin with words spoken outward. It begins with awareness awakened inward. It does not operate through desperation. It operates through alignment. The moment this is understood, prayer stops being a request sent into the unknown and becomes a living interaction between consciousness and the field of reality itself. Imagine for a moment that everything you have ever longed for already exists somewhere within the deeper layers of existence. Health, love, joy, creativity, freedom, abundance, peace of mind. All of these experiences may already exist not as physical objects you can touch yet, but as possibilities waiting within an unseen field of potential. If this is true, then prayer is not about creating something from nothing. Prayer becomes the act of aligning yourself with a possibility that already exists. Instead of begging for the future to change, you begin learning how to synchronize your inner world with the reality you wish to experience. In this sense, prayer becomes less about asking and more about becoming. Life does not simply respond to the words that pass through your lips. Life responds to the state of being you live from moment to moment. Every thought you consistently return to, every emotional pattern you sustain, every belief you hold about yourself and about the world becomes a signal that interacts with reality. Many people discover this truth through frustration. They repeat affirmations. They say positive phrases. They try to convince themselves that success or love is coming into their lives. Yet nothing seems to change. The reason is simple. Words alone do not create transformation. Reality listens to the deeper language of emotion and identity. A person may say that they are abundant while internally feeling fear and insecurity. They may say they are loved while carrying a deep belief that they are unworthy of connection. In these moments, the surface words are weak signals, while the deeper emotional state continues broadcasting the old message. This is why two people can stand in the same environment and experience completely different realities. One person moves through life with quiet confidence and expectation. Even when difficulties appear, they somehow encounter opportunity, kindness, and unexpected support. Another person moves through the same world, carrying the expectation of struggle and disappointment. And again they meet closed doors and frustration. The difference is rarely explained by circumstances alone. The difference often lies in the invisible posture of consciousness each person carries within. Life reflects the internal atmosphere of the observer. Prayer therefore becomes something far more powerful than a moment of speaking sacred words. Prayer becomes the emotional and psychological state from which you live your life. When someone repeatedly feels gratitude, they begin aligning themselves with experiences that echo gratitude. When someone lives with curiosity and hope, they start noticing possibilities that others overlook. When someone carries resentment or fear, they unconsciously tune themselves towards situations that confirm those emotions. Reality mirrors the dominant signal that consciousness sends into it. Understanding this transforms prayer from weakness into creative participation. You are no longer a person standing outside life, hoping that something will be granted to you. You become a participant in the unfolding of reality itself. The universe is not merely a distant observer of your requests. It is a responsive field that reflects the qualities of attention, emotion, and belief that you consistently embody. Prayer then becomes a subtle art of alignment. It is the process of bringing your thoughts, feelings, and awareness into harmony with the life you wish to experience. This does not mean denying the challenges that exist in the present moment. Life can still contain uncertainty, pain, and obstacles. But prayer invites you to recognize that the outer circumstances of today are not the final definition of what is possible. Beneath visible events, there exists a deeper layer of creative potential. When you begin to cultivate a state of gratitude before evidence appears, when you allow yourself to feel peace before circumstances improve, when you carry the quiet certainty that life can unfold in unexpected ways, you begin interacting with that deeper layer of reality. Some of the most powerful prayers in human history were never spoken aloud. They were felt as certainty before proof appeared. They were lived as a quiet trust that something meaningful was already unfolding. A person who carries gratitude even in uncertain times is already broadcasting a signal of alignment. A person who chooses love in a difficult world is already shaping the emotional architecture of their future. These states are not passive emotions. They are creative forces that influence how reality organizes itself around a human life. The opening secret is simple yet profound. Prayer is not begging the universe to change your life. Prayer is the art of becoming the inner condition through which a different reality can emerge. The moment you understand this, prayer stops being something you do only in moments of desperation. It becomes the way you think, the way you feel, the way you walk through each day. Every thought becomes a small prayer. Every emotional state becomes a signal shaping the direction of your life. The question then is not whether you pray. The question is what kind of prayer your state of being is constantly expressing. When someone lives in fear, their life becomes a prayer for more reasons to fear. When someone lives in resentment, their life becomes a prayer for more conflict. When someone lives in gratitude and possibility, their life becomes a prayer for expansion and opportunity. Life faithfully mirrors the signal it receives. The secret is already within you. Prayer begins the moment you stop asking life to prove that change is possible and begin living as if the deeper potential of life is already listening. Most people believe that life responds to what they say, but the deeper truth is that reality responds to what they are. Words can be spoken easily, but the state of being behind those words carries the true signal. A person may speak hopeful phrases, may repeat affirmations, may declare that success, love, or healing is coming into their life. Yet if their emotional core still carries doubt, fear, or quiet resignation, the message reaching reality is not the hopeful statement, but the deeper emotional tone beneath it. Life does not organize itself around the sentences we say in passing. It organizes itself around the inner atmosphere we consistently live within. Imagine two people speaking the exact same words. Both may say that they believe a new opportunity is coming. Both may claim they trust life and expect good things. On the surface, their language appears identical, yet internally their experiences are completely different. One speaks those words while feeling genuine anticipation and quiet confidence. The other speaks them while secretly expecting disappointment. Even though the language is the same, the emotional signals they send into the world are completely different. Over time, the difference becomes visible in their experiences. One begins to notice opportunities that appear unexpectedly. Supportive connections emerge. Doors open at moments that seem almost coincidental. The other continues to encounter delays, confusion, and situations that confirm their hidden expectation of difficulty. The difference is not in the vocabulary they used. The difference lies in the state of being each person carries inside. Reality listens to the language of feeling far more than the language of speech. Words are momentary expressions of thought, but emotional states are ongoing broadcasts of energy and perception. When a person consistently lives with gratitude, even before obvious reasons appear, their attention naturally begins noticing things that support that feeling. They recognize small opportunities. They appreciate subtle progress. They engage with others in ways that create cooperation rather than resistance. Gratitude reshapes perception, and perception reshapes experience. In the same way, fear reorganizes perception toward threat, disappointment, and loss. The external world may contain many possibilities at once, but the internal state of the observer determines which possibilities become visible and which remain unseen. This is why speaking positive words without changing the emotional foundation beneath them rarely transforms a life. Someone may say they believe in abundance while their thoughts constantly return to worry about money. They may say they expect love while repeatedly recalling past rejection and emotional pain. They may say they trust the future while secretly imagining everything that could go wrong. These contradictions create a scattered signal. It is like sending two different instructions at the same time, one toward possibility and one toward limitation. Reality responds to the stronger pattern, which is usually the emotional habit that has been practiced the longest. Understanding this reveals something important about the nature of prayer and intention. True prayer is not simply a sentence spoken toward the sky. True prayer is the emotional environment you inhabit. It is the mood of your consciousness, the tone of your expectations, the quiet story you carry about who you are and how life works. Every day people pray without realizing it through the emotional narratives they repeat. When someone constantly anticipates conflict, their life becomes a prayer for more situations that confirm that expectation. When someone quietly believes that life supports their growth, they begin encountering experiences that mirror that belief. The human mind often underestimates the power of this invisible influence because it expects change to appear instantly and dramatically. In reality, the process is subtle and gradual. A shift in state of being first alters perception. Then perception alters choices. Choices alter behavior. Behavior influences relationships and opportunities. And over time, the entire pattern of life begins to reorganize. What once appeared random starts revealing an underlying coherence. Events that seem disconnected begin forming meaningful sequences. What looked like coincidence becomes a reflection of alignment. Think of the mind as a lens through which reality is filtered. The world contains countless possibilities in every moment, but the lens determines which of those possibilities become visible to you. When the lens is shaped by fear, it focuses attention on danger and limitation. When the lens is shaped by confidence, it reveals opportunity and possibility. When the lens is shaped by resentment, it finds evidence of unfairness. When the lens is shaped by curiosity, it discovers unexpected pathways. The external world may not change immediately, but the part of reality that becomes accessible to you shifts dramatically. This is why mastering your state of being becomes far more powerful than trying to control external events directly. External circumstances are complex, involving many factors beyond immediate control. Your inner state, however, is always within the realm of influence. When someone learns to consciously guide their emotional posture, they begin shaping the signal they send into life. This does not mean forcing artificial positivity or denying difficult emotions. Instead, it means gradually cultivating awareness of the states that dominate your daily experience and gently redirecting them toward greater coherence. A person who repeatedly returns to gratitude, even in small moments, strengthens a pattern of perception that reveals progress and possibility. A person who practices calm presence during uncertainty begins interacting with challenges in more creative ways. A person who chooses trust rather than constant suspicion opens the door to cooperation with others. Each of these shifts begins internally, yet their effects ripple outward through decisions, conversations, and actions. Over time, life starts reflecting the new orientation. Reality therefore listens not to what you claim to want, but to what you consistently embody. The deeper signal is always the state you return to when no one is watching and when no words are being spoken. Your quiet expectations, your habitual emotions, and the way you interpret daily experiences together form the true message you send into the world. When those elements move in harmony, the signal becomes clear and powerful. This understanding transforms the role of intention and prayer. Instead of trying to persuade reality with repeated statements, you begin focusing on the condition of your inner world. You ask not only what you desire, but who you are becoming while desiring it. You observe whether your thoughts and emotions support the reality you wish to experience or quietly contradict it. As this awareness grows, prayer becomes less about asking and more about aligning. It becomes the practice of living in a state that reflects the life you wish to see unfold. The universe may not respond to every sentence you speak, but it always responds to the state of consciousness you sustain. Your life begins changing the moment your inner signal becomes clear enough for reality to reflect it. To understand why your state of being matters so deeply, you must first explore a powerful idea about the nature of reality itself. Beneath the physical world that your senses perceive, there exists a deeper layer of existence that is far less solid and far more fluid than it appears. What we experience as reality is not only a collection of fixed objects and events. At its deepest level, reality behaves more like a vast ocean of possibility, a living field of potential where countless outcomes exist before they ever take form in the visible world. Long before something appears as a physical event, it exists first as a probability, as a possibility waiting for the right conditions to emerge into experience. Imagine standing before an enormous library that contains every story that could ever be written. Each book represents a possible version of life, a possible relationship, a possible opportunity, a possible future that has not yet taken shape. The shelves stretch endlessly in every direction, holding more possibilities than any human mind could count. Most people walk through life unaware that such a library exists. They assume that the few experiences they see around them are the only ones available. Yet in truth, the field of potential is far larger than the narrow slice of reality that appears in front of us each day. Within this unseen field exist countless variations of every experience you could imagine. A version of your life filled with deeper peace, a version where your creativity flourishes, a version where meaningful work appears in unexpected ways, a version where relationships become more supportive and fulfilling. These possibilities are not created the moment you begin to want them. They already exist as patterns within the deeper architecture of reality. What determines whether they remain invisible or begin appearing in your life is the relationship between your consciousness and the field of potential. Modern physics has hinted at this strange nature of reality in ways that once seemed impossible to imagine. At the smallest scales of existence, particles do not behave like fixed objects. They behave like waves of probability that can exist in many states at once until they are observed. Before observation, the particle is not confined to a single position or outcome. It exists as a cloud of potential, a range of possibilities waiting to resolve into a specific event. Only when attention interacts with that field does one possibility become real in the physical world. While the language of science describes this phenomenon in mathematical terms, the deeper insight resonates with ancient spiritual teachings as well. Many traditions have long suggested that the visible world is not the ultimate layer of reality, but a surface expression of deeper patterns of consciousness and potential. In this view, life is not a rigid structure that unfolds independently of human awareness. Instead, it is a dynamic interaction between the observer and the field of possibilities surrounding them. This idea transforms the way we understand desire. When you feel a genuine longing for something meaningful, it may not be an arbitrary wish invented by your imagination. It may be a signal that a certain possibility already exists within the larger field of life, and that your consciousness has begun resonating with it. Just as a radio receives only the frequencies it is tuned to hear, the human mind often becomes aware of possibilities that match its internal orientation. What you call desire may actually be the recognition of a potential reality calling for expression. However, the existence of a possibility does not guarantee that it will appear in your experience. The field of potential contains countless outcomes, and only a small portion of them become part of your life story. The determining factor is alignment. When your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs resonate with a particular possibility, you begin interacting with that part of the field. Your attention strengthens it. Your emotional energy nourishes it. Your decisions gradually move you closer to circumstances where that possibility can manifest as a real experience. This process is subtle but powerful. Imagine planting a seed in fertile soil. The seed already contains the blueprint of a tree, yet the tree does not appear instantly. The soil must support it. Water must nourish it. Sunlight must reach it, and time must allow it to grow. In the same way, a possibility within the field of life contains the blueprint of a future experience, but the inner conditions of the observer determine whether that possibility develops or remains dormant. Your state of being becomes the soil in which potential either grows or fades. When someone consistently lives from a state of limitation, they unconsciously align themselves with possibilities that mirror that limitation. Their attention repeatedly returns to what is missing, what has failed before, what might go wrong again. These mental and emotional patterns strengthen the probabilities that match them. On the other hand, when someone gradually cultivates curiosity, openness, and expectation, they begin interacting with a different set of possibilities. Their perception expands. They notice paths that once seemed invisible, and opportunities begin appearing that previously seemed unlikely. None of this requires blind belief or unrealistic optimism. It requires only the recognition that the world contains more possibilities than any single moment reveals. What appears fixed today may be only one expression among many potential outcomes. By learning to guide your attention and emotional state, you influence which possibilities gain strength in your experience. This does not mean controlling every detail of life. Rather, it means participating in the unfolding process through the orientation of your consciousness. Within the field of infinite potential, the future is not a single predetermined path. It is a landscape of many possible directions. Your state of being acts like a compass that gradually guides you towards certain regions of that landscape. The more consistently you embody the emotional and psychological qualities connected with a particular possibility, the more strongly you interact with it. This understanding changes the meaning of desire completely. Instead of seeing your dreams as distant objects you must chase, they become signals pointing toward possibilities already present in the deeper layers of life. Prayer then becomes the practice of aligning yourself with those possibilities until the invisible begins taking shape in the visible world. The field of infinite potential surrounds you at every moment. Within it exist more opportunities, relationships, ideas, and experiences than you can currently imagine. Your consciousness is the instrument that selects which of those possibilities becomes part of your life. When your attention, belief, and emotion begin resonating with a new possibility, the invisible blueprint slowly gathers the conditions needed to appear. What once existed only as potential begins its journey toward reality. To understand how possibility becomes reality, we must look more closely at the role of observation. In everyday life, observation appears passive. We believe we simply look at the world and see what already exists. A mountain is there whether we look at it or not. A building stands in place regardless of who observes it. At the level of ordinary experience, this seems true. Yet when scientists began studying the smallest structures of matter, they discovered something extraordinary. At the deepest level, reality does not behave like solid objects waiting to be seen. Instead, it behaves like waves of probability that only become definite when observation occurs. Before observation, a particle can exist in many possible states at the same time. It is not fixed in one position or one outcome. It exists as a cloud of potential waiting for interaction. When observation enters the system, the wave of possibilities collapses into a single result, and what was once a field of potential becomes a specific event. This phenomenon is often described as the observer effect. It does not mean that human attention magically creates physical objects out of nothing, but it reveals something far more subtle and powerful. Observation participates in shaping which potential becomes actual. Reality, at its most fundamental level, contains multiple possibilities, and the act of observation helps determine which possibility emerges into form. This insight suggests that consciousness is not merely watching the universe unfold. Consciousness interacts with the unfolding itself. When we apply this idea to everyday life, a profound perspective begins to emerge. The experiences that form your reality may not be random events appearing from a rigid external world. Instead, they may be the result of continuous interaction between your awareness and the field of potential that surrounds you. Each moment, your attention highlights certain possibilities while ignoring countless others. Your expectations direct your focus. Your focus strengthens particular outcomes, and gradually the invisible field of probability organizes itself into the experiences you recognize as your life. Consider how often your attention determines what becomes visible to you. When someone begins thinking about buying a specific type of car, they suddenly start seeing that same car everywhere on the road. When someone becomes interested in a new idea, they begin noticing books, conversations, and opportunities connected to that idea appearing in their environment. The world did not suddenly create those things at that exact moment. They were already present. But attention illuminated them. Observation reorganized perception, and perception changed the reality that person experienced. In the same way, emotional states influence observation in powerful ways. A person who carries anxiety tends to notice potential threats and problems. Their mind scans the environment, searching for signs that confirm their concerns. Over time, their experience of life becomes filled with evidence that the world is difficult and uncertain. Another person who cultivates curiosity and openness observes the same world but notices different elements. They see possibilities, creative solutions, unexpected connections between events. Their reality appears richer and more supportive, not necessarily because the external world has changed, but because their observation interacts with the field of possibilities in a different way. Observation therefore acts like a spotlight, moving across the vast stage of potential. Wherever the light rests, possibilities begin taking shape. Where attention lingers, energy gathers. Where awareness repeatedly returns, patterns strengthen. This does not happen instantly or dramatically in every moment, but over time the effect becomes undeniable. Your dominant patterns of observation slowly sculpt the structure of your experience. This is why the inner habits of attention are so important. If a person constantly observes lack, they strengthen the pattern of lack. If they continually focus on past failure, they reinforce the expectation of future failure. The mind becomes trained to collapse possibilities that mirror those observations. On the other hand, when someone deliberately begins observing possibility, progress, and opportunity, even in small forms, they gradually interact with a different layer of the potential field. Their awareness begins selecting from a broader range of outcomes. It is important to understand that observation does not mean ignoring difficulties or pretending that problems do not exist. Life contains challenges and uncertainty for everyone. True observation means choosing where the center of your attention rests. You may recognize a challenge while still directing most of your awareness towards solutions. You may acknowledge uncertainty while remaining attentive to opportunities emerging from it. In this way, observation becomes an act of creative participation rather than passive reaction. Over time, the patterns you observe most frequently begin shaping your identity. Identity then influences the choices you make, the actions you take, and the relationships you form. These behaviors interact with the world around you, producing experiences that appear to confirm the very patterns you began with. Which started as a simple habit of attention slowly becomes a self-reinforcing cycle that builds the structure of a life. This process explains why some individuals appear to transform their lives in ways that seem almost miraculous. They begin by changing how they observe reality. Instead of focusing on limitation, they train their awareness to notice possibility. Instead of rehearsing past failure, they imagine and feel new outcomes as if they were already unfolding. Their observation interacts with the field of potential in a new way. Over time, circumstances begin aligning with the direction of their attention. Observation then becomes much more than perception. It becomes participation. Every moment, your awareness moves through the field of possibilities, selecting certain patterns and giving them strength. What you consistently observe becomes the seed of what eventually appears in form. The wave of possibility responds to the direction of consciousness, and gradually the invisible potential begins shaping itself into the experiences you call real. Understanding this changes the role of the observer entirely. You are not merely a witness watching events unfold around you. You are a participant whose attention helps determine which possibilities rise from the ocean of potential into the visible world. Each thought you dwell on, each emotional state you maintain, each image of the future you hold in your awareness becomes part of the creative process. Within the vast field of potential, countless realities exist simultaneously. Observation is the bridge between that invisible field and the physical world you experience each day. When your awareness repeatedly rests on a particular possibility, it begins guiding the collapse of potential into form. The more coherent and consistent your observation becomes, the more clearly reality organizes around it. In this way, the act of observing becomes an act of shaping, and the invisible waves of possibility slowly crystallize into the life you see before you. For thousands of years, human beings have asked the same fundamental question: what is the true nature of reality, and what role does human consciousness play within it? Long before modern science began exploring the microscopic structure of matter, ancient spiritual traditions across the world were already pointing toward a profound idea. They suggested that the visible world is not the deepest layer of existence, but rather an expression of deeper forces of consciousness, awareness, and intention. Mystics, philosophers, and spiritual teachers from different cultures often use different language to describe this truth. Yet the essence of their message was remarkably similar. They taught that the world people experience outwardly is connected to the state of awareness they cultivate inwardly. In many ancient teachings, the universe was described as a living intelligence rather than a collection of disconnected objects. According to these traditions, reality is responsive, dynamic, and deeply interconnected with human awareness. The mind was not seen as a passive observer, but as an active participant in the unfolding of life. When people cultivated clarity, faith, and inner harmony, they aligned themselves with higher possibilities within existence. When they lived in fear, resentment, or confusion, they aligned with very different outcomes. These teachings appeared in many places throughout history. Ancient Eastern philosophies spoke of the universe as a unified field of consciousness. Mystical traditions in the Middle East described reality as a mirror reflecting the inner state of the soul. Indigenous wisdom traditions often spoke of a sacred relationship between thought, intention, and the world of experience. For a long time, these insights were viewed by the modern world as poetic or symbolic rather than practical. Many believed they belonged only to religion or spiritual imagination. Yet over the past century, the development of modern science began revealing discoveries that unexpectedly echoed some of these ancient ideas. As physicists explored the quantum structure of matter, they discovered that reality at its smallest levels behaves in ways that challenge the traditional view of a purely mechanical universe. Particles can exist as probabilities rather than fixed objects. Observation influences the outcome of certain physical processes. The boundary between the observer and the observed becomes less clear than once believed. These discoveries did not prove ancient spiritual teachings in a literal sense, but they opened the door to a new perspective. The universe appears less like a rigid machine and more like a dynamic system where potential, interaction, and observation play significant roles. Modern neuroscience has also contributed to this evolving understanding. Researchers studying the brain have discovered that repeated thoughts and emotional experiences physically reshape neural pathways. The brain does not remain fixed. It adapts continuously to patterns of attention and feeling. In other words, the inner life of a person gradually reorganizes the structure of the mind itself. When these scientific insights are placed alongside ancient spiritual teachings, an interesting pattern begins to emerge. Both perspectives suggest that human consciousness is not irrelevant to reality. Instead, consciousness participates in shaping how reality is experienced. Spiritual traditions describe this through the language of awareness, intention, and prayer. Modern research describes it through concepts such as perception, neuroplasticity, and attention shaping behavior. The vocabulary is different, but the underlying principle is surprisingly similar. The inner world influences the outer experience. One of the most influential teachers who explored this connection in the 20th century was Neville Goddard. He proposed that imagination and feeling are creative forces that shape the experiences people encounter in their lives. According to his teachings, the world around an individual reflects the assumptions they repeatedly accept as true. When a person learns to feel the reality of a desired outcome as if it already exists, they begin interacting with life from a different identity. Over time, circumstances reorganize themselves to reflect that inner assumption. While many people initially dismissed such ideas as mystical speculation, they resonate strongly with modern insights about how belief and perception influence behavior and opportunity. In recent decades, thinkers who bridge science and spirituality have continued exploring these connections. Researchers studying the relationship between emotion, brain activity, and physical health have observed that emotional states influence not only mental perception, but also the body's biological systems. Feelings such as gratitude, hope, and connection activate physiological patterns very different from those associated with chronic stress or fear. These emotional states affect decision-making, relationships, creativity, and resilience. In this way, the inner environment of the mind begins shaping the trajectory of a person's life in measurable ways. What becomes fascinating is how often ancient wisdom anticipated these insights long before scientific language existed to describe them. Many spiritual traditions taught that gratitude opens the heart and invites blessings. Modern psychology now shows that gratitude shifts attention toward positive patterns in experience and strengthens emotional resilience. Mystical teachings emphasize the importance of faith and expectation. Contemporary research demonstrates that expectation influences perception and behavior, which in turn shapes outcomes in subtle but powerful ways. The language may differ, yet the pattern remains consistent across cultures and centuries. This convergence of ancient insight and modern understanding suggests that the relationship between consciousness and reality is far more intimate than previously assumed. Prayer, attention, and awareness are not merely symbolic rituals disconnected from everyday life. They represent ways of directing attention and emotional energy towards certain possibilities within the field of experience. When practiced consistently, they influence perception, behavior, and interaction with the world. The significance of this realization is profound. It means that the wisdom of the past and the discoveries of the present are not necessarily opposing viewpoints. Instead, they can be seen as different lenses examining the same mystery from different directions. Ancient traditions approached the mystery through introspection, meditation, and spiritual insight. Modern science approaches it through observation, experimentation, and measurement. Together, they point toward a deeper understanding of human participation in reality. At the center of this meeting point lies a simple yet transformative idea. The outer world we experience is not completely separate from the inner world we cultivate. Our thoughts influence attention. Attention shapes perception. Perception guides behavior. Behavior interacts with circumstances and people, gradually influencing the path our lives take. When inner awareness becomes aligned with intention, the patterns of life begin shifting in ways that once seemed impossible. Understanding this intersection between ancient wisdom and modern thought invites us to reconsider the meaning of prayer and consciousness. Instead of seeing prayer as a distant ritual directed toward an external power, we begin to recognize it as a process of aligning awareness with possibility. The teachings of the past and the insights of the present both point toward the same conclusion. Human consciousness is not a passive witness to reality. It is a dynamic participant in the unfolding of life. Most people grow up believing that life is something that happens to them. Events appear, circumstances change, opportunities arise or disappear, and individuals simply react to what the world presents. In this view, reality is a powerful external force while the individual is a passenger moving through it. Success or failure appears to depend largely on luck, environment, or forces beyond personal influence. While it is true that no one controls every external event, this common belief overlooks a deeper principle about the relationship between consciousness and experience. The world you encounter each day is not only a sequence of external situations, it is also the result of how your awareness interacts with those situations. Life is not merely happening around you, it is continually taking shape through the way you perceive, interpret, and respond to it. Consider how two individuals can live through the same external situation, yet experience it in completely different ways. One person may see a challenge as a sign that everything is falling apart, while another sees the same challenge as an opportunity to grow, adapt, and discover new possibilities. The situation itself may remain identical, but the meaning attached to it changes the entire direction of the experience. That meaning influences emotions. Emotions influence decisions. Decisions influence behavior, and behavior influences the outcomes that follow. In this way, the internal interpretation of events becomes a powerful force, shaping what happens next. Every moment, the human mind acts as a filter through which reality is interpreted. The world contains far more information than the brain can consciously process, so perception automatically selects certain details while ignoring countless others. This selection is not random. It is guided by beliefs, expectations, memories, and emotional patterns formed over time. A person who expects rejection will unconsciously notice signs that confirm that expectation. A person who believes in possibility will notice subtle opportunities that others overlook. The environment may contain both signals at once, Yet the observer's internal orientation determines which signals become visible. This is why life often appears to confirm the stories people already carry within themselves. Someone who believes that the world is unfair may repeatedly encounter experiences that seem to validate that belief. Someone who believes that growth is always possible often discovers pathways forward, even during difficult moments. The external world provides the raw material of experience, but the mind organizes that material into meaning. That meaning becomes the lens through which the next moment is approached. Over time, the cycle reinforces itself, gradually shaping the direction of a life. Understanding this process changes how you see your role in the unfolding of events. Instead of seeing yourself as a passive observer waiting for circumstances to improve, you begin to recognize that your state of awareness is continuously influencing the shape of your experience. The emotions you cultivate determine how you approach opportunities and challenges. The expectations you carry guide the choices you make. The attention you direct towards certain possibilities strengthens their presence in your life. Through these subtle mechanisms, reality begins organizing itself around the patterns of consciousness you repeatedly express. This does not mean that every event is directly created by your thoughts or that life becomes completely controllable. The world remains complex, filled with interactions between countless individuals and unpredictable conditions. However, your inner orientation still plays a decisive role in determining how those events unfold within your personal experience. Two people may encounter the same unexpected opportunity, yet one recognizes its potential and acts, while the other dismisses it or fails to notice it entirely. Two individuals may face the same obstacle, yet one discovers a creative solution while the other becomes overwhelmed and stops moving forward. In both cases, the difference lies not only in external conditions, but in the internal posture each person brings to the moment. This principle becomes even clearer when we examine how identity shapes behavior. People tend to act in ways that confirm their self-image. Someone who sees themselves as capable approaches challenges with curiosity and persistence. Someone who believes they are limited often withdraws before fully exploring their potential. These behaviors influence how others respond, which opportunities appear, and what experiences become possible. Over time, the external results reinforce the internal identity that produced them, strengthening the cycle even further. When you realize that the world is not simply happening to you but is continually shaped through your awareness, a new sense of responsibility and possibility emerges. You begin paying attention to the subtle patterns that guide your perception and behavior. You notice how often your mind returns to familiar stories about what is possible and what is not. You recognize that by gently shifting these patterns, you can gradually change the way life unfolds around you. This shift does not require dramatic effort or sudden transformation. It begins with awareness. When you observe your own reactions, you gain the ability to pause before repeating them automatically. Instead of assuming that every negative thought must be true, you can examine it with curiosity. Instead of reacting to every challenge with fear, you can explore how a different perspective might reveal unexpected solutions. Each small change in perception influences the next decision you make, and those decisions slowly reshape the trajectory of your life. Over time, this practice transforms how you experience reality. You begin noticing possibilities that once seemed invisible. Conversations open doors you would not have recognized before. Obstacles that once appeared permanent reveal hidden pathways around them. None of this happens because the external world suddenly becomes perfect. It happens because your relationship with the world has changed. The same environment now interacts with a different state of consciousness. In this way, life becomes less like a rigid script and more like a dynamic conversation between awareness and circumstance. The world offers situations, and your consciousness responds. That response influences what emerges next. When your inner state becomes more coherent, curious, and intentional, the conversation with life evolves. Possibilities that once seemed distant begin moving closer, not because the universe suddenly decided to reward you, but because your awareness started interacting with reality in a new way. The world is therefore not only something you move through, it is something that continually forms around the patterns of attention, belief, and emotion you embody. When you change the way you participate in this process, the direction of your experience gradually changes as well. Life does not simply happen to you. It unfolds through the relationship between your consciousness and the possibilities that surround you. To understand how reality takes shape through you, it is necessary to look more deeply at the nature of consciousness itself. Most people assume that consciousness is simply a byproduct of the brain, something produced by electrical activity inside the skull. In this common view, the brain generates thoughts, emotions, and awareness in the same way a machine produces movement. According to this belief, consciousness is secondary to the physical world, an effect created by matter rather than a force that influences it. Yet when we examine experience more carefully, another possibility begins to appear. Before any thought arises, before any emotion is felt, before any perception of the world occurs, there is a silent awareness that observes it all. This awareness is not the thought itself. It is the presence that notices the thought. It is the quiet witness behind every mental and emotional movement. Each moment you experience life through this observing presence. Thoughts appear and disappear within it. Emotions rise and fall within it. Sensations come and go. Memories surface and fade. Yet the awareness that observes these changes remains constant. When you notice a thought, you are not the thought itself. You are the awareness recognizing that thought. When you feel an emotion, you are not limited to that emotion. You are the awareness capable of observing the emotion as it moves through you. This simple realization carries profound implications. It means that the deepest level of your identity is not the shifting content of the mind, but the consciousness that perceives it. Many spiritual traditions throughout history have pointed toward this same insight. They describe the human being not as a collection of thoughts, but as a field of awareness experiencing those thoughts. From this perspective, the mind becomes a tool within consciousness, rather than the source of consciousness itself. When people identify completely with the thoughts running through their mind, they feel controlled by circumstances and emotions. When they recognize the observing awareness behind those thoughts, a new sense of freedom appears. The observer gains the ability to choose which thoughts deserve attention and which can be allowed to pass without shaping behavior. This capacity to observe rather than automatically react is one of the most powerful abilities human beings possess. The moment you become aware of your thoughts, you create a small space between the observer and the mental pattern being observed. Within that space, new possibilities appear. Instead of repeating the same reactions, you can choose a different response. Instead of reinforcing an old belief, you can question whether it still serves your growth. The observer becomes the point from which new directions in life begin. When consciousness learns to observe itself with clarity, the relationship between awareness and reality begins to change. The observer is no longer trapped inside automatic patterns created by past experience. Instead, the observer can gradually reshape those patterns. Thoughts that once dominated attention begin losing their influence when they are seen clearly. Emotions that once seemed overwhelming become easier to navigate when they are recognized as temporary movements within awareness, rather than permanent definitions of identity. Through observation, consciousness regains its role as the guiding force of experience. This process has direct consequences for how reality unfolds. As long as a person remains identified with unconscious mental patterns, those patterns continue shaping perception and behavior automatically. Fear generates more fearful interpretations of events. Doubt produces hesitation and missed opportunities. Anger attracts situations that seem to justify more anger. Because the observer is unaware of these patterns, they appear to be caused entirely by the outside world. Yet when awareness becomes more attentive, the cycle begins to shift. The observer notices the pattern before it fully takes control, and in that moment a different path becomes possible. Conscious observation allows a person to redirect attention toward thoughts and emotions that support the life they wish to create. Instead of feeding the patterns that limit possibility, the observer begins nurturing patterns that expand it. Curiosity replaces rigid certainty. Gratitude interrupts habitual complaint. Confidence slowly replaces the quiet expectation of failure. These shifts may appear subtle at first, yet they influence every decision and interaction that follows. Over time, the outer circumstances of life begin reflecting the new orientation of consciousness. Understanding yourself as the observer also reveals something essential about manifestation. The creative power does not lie in forcing reality to change through effort alone. The power lies in guiding the direction of awareness. What you consistently observe and emotionally invest in gradually becomes the dominant pattern influencing your actions. Those actions interact with the world, producing experiences that appear as manifestations. The process begins not with external control but with internal observation. This is why developing awareness of your inner world is so important. Without observation, the mind moves automatically from one thought to another, repeating familiar stories about what is possible and what is not. With observation, the mind becomes transparent. Patterns that once operated invisibly become visible, and once they are visible, they can be transformed. The observer gains the ability to choose which ideas deserve energy and which should be released. Over time, this practice strengthens a stable center of awareness within the individual. Instead of being pushed and pulled by every emotional wave, the observer remains grounded, capable of responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively. This stability allows intention to guide attention more consistently. When attention becomes consistent, the signals sent into life become clearer, and reality begins reflecting that clarity. The observer, therefore, stands at the center of the creative process. Consciousness is not merely watching events unfold, but quietly guiding the patterns that influence them. Each moment awareness selects where attention rests. That attention strengthens certain possibilities within the field of experience while allowing others to fade. The observer does not need to control every detail of the world. It only needs to guide the direction of perception and meaning. In this way, consciousness becomes the origin point from which manifestation begins. Thoughts are tools within awareness. Emotions are signals moving through awareness. Perception is shaped by awareness. When the observer becomes clear and intentional, the patterns of life gradually reorganize around that clarity. The source of manifestation is therefore not outside you, but within the awareness that quietly observes every moment of your experience. One of the most powerful insights about human experience is also one of the easiest to overlook. People often believe they are seeing reality exactly as it exists. They assume their perceptions are neutral reflections of the world around them. Yet the deeper truth is far more complex. Human beings do not see the world exactly as it is. They see the world through the lens of who they are. Every perception is filtered through beliefs, expectations, emotional patterns, memories, and personal identity. The world that appears in front of you is not only shaped by external events, it is also shaped by the internal structure of your consciousness. Imagine placing two different colored lenses over a camera. The landscape being photographed remains the same, but the image captured by the camera changes depending on the lens. A blue lens produces one version of the scene. A red lens produces another. Neither image is entirely false, yet neither is the complete picture of reality. The same principle applies to human perception. Your mind acts as a lens through which life is interpreted. That lens is shaped by past experiences, cultural conditioning, emotional habits, and the story you carry about yourself. Because the lens operates automatically, most of the time people rarely realize how much it influences what they see. For example, a person who believes that people cannot be trusted often interprets neutral actions as signs of betrayal. A simple delay in communication becomes proof that someone is dishonest. A small misunderstanding becomes evidence of deeper conflict. The world appears hostile because the lens through which it is viewed expects hostility. Another person with a different inner lens may interpret the same events in a completely different way. Instead of assuming negative intentions, they look for context, misunderstanding, or simple human imperfection. In their experience, the world appears more cooperative and forgiving. The same events occur, but the meaning attached to them creates entirely different realities. This process operates continuously in everyday life. The mind constantly interprets what it sees and hears. When someone receives feedback at work, one person may interpret it as a personal attack, while another sees it as helpful guidance. When an unexpected change occurs, one individual may see it as a disaster, while another views it as an opening for new opportunity. These interpretations do not simply influence emotions for a brief moment. They shape decisions, actions, and relationships that follow. Over time, the accumulated effects of these interpretations form the structure of a life. Psychology has long recognized this phenomenon through the concept of cognitive framing. The way an event is framed in the mind determines the emotional and behavioral response to that event. Yet even this explanation touches only part of the deeper process. Beyond conscious interpretation lies the underlying identity a person holds about themselves and the world. Identity silently guides which interpretations feel natural and which feel impossible. Someone who believes they are capable tends to see challenges as problems that can eventually be solved. Someone who believes they are powerless often sees the same challenges as proof that success is unattainable. These inner assumptions operate so quietly that many people mistake them for objective reality. When life seems filled with difficulty, it appears obvious that the world itself is difficult. When opportunities appear scarce, it feels natural to assume that opportunity rarely exists. Yet the deeper pattern may be that perception itself is selecting certain aspects of reality while ignoring others. The world contains both obstacles and openings at the same time. The lens of consciousness determines which of those elements becomes the dominant experience. This understanding does not mean that perception alone creates every event in life. External circumstances still exist and influence experience. However, the interpretation of those circumstances determines how a person interacts with them. Two individuals facing the same situation can move in completely different directions because they interpret the situation differently. One may withdraw while the other engages creatively. One may give up while the other persists. Those choices gradually generate different outcomes that appear to confirm each person's original view of the world. The mind, therefore, functions as a powerful meaning-making system. It continuously organizes raw experience into patterns that support the identity and beliefs already present within consciousness. If someone believes the world is full of opportunity, their perception naturally highlights signs that support that belief. They notice helpful connections, recognize emerging possibilities, and remain open to unexpected paths. If someone believes the world is filled with limitation, their attention tends to focus on barriers, risks, and past disappointments. The same environment contains evidence for both interpretations, yet the lens of identity determines which evidence becomes visible. Once this pattern is recognized, a new level of freedom appears. Instead of assuming that every perception is an absolute fact, you begin examining the lens through which you see the world. You ask yourself what beliefs are shaping your interpretations. You become curious about the emotional patterns that guide your attention. This awareness does not instantly transform perception, but it opens the possibility of change. When the observer becomes aware of the lens itself can gradually be refined. As your internal orientation begins shifting, your experience of the world changes as well. Gratitude reveals aspects of life that previously seemed ordinary or invisible. Curiosity uncovers connections and possibilities that once went unnoticed. Compassion allows you to interpret the actions of others with greater understanding rather than immediate judgment. These changes may appear subtle, yet over time they reshape how life unfolds around you. The most important realization is that the world you experience is always partly a reflection of the consciousness experiencing it. Your beliefs guide attention. Attention shapes perception. Perception influences action. Action generates results that reinforce belief. When this cycle operates unconsciously, it can keep people repeating the same patterns for years. When it becomes conscious, it can be redirected toward growth and transformation. The world is therefore not only an external environment waiting to be observed, it is also a mirror that reflects the patterns of the observer. When your consciousness changes, the image reflected by that mirror gradually changes as well. You do not see the world exactly as it is. You see the world as the lens of your own awareness allows it to appear. And as that awareness evolves, the reality you experience evolves with it. One of the most liberating realizations a human being can have is the discovery that the mind and the self are not the same thing. Most people move through life believing that every thought that appears in their mind defines who they are. If a fearful thought arises, they believe they are afraid. If a doubtful thought appears, they assume they are incapable. If a critical voice echoes inside their head, they accept it as truth. Yet when we examine experience more carefully, something remarkable becomes clear. Thoughts appear, remain for a moment, and then disappear. New thoughts replace them constantly. If every thought truly defined who you are, then your identity would change every second. The deeper truth is that behind every thought there is an awareness that notices it. That awareness is constant even while the thoughts change. Imagine sitting in a quiet room watching clouds pass across the sky. The clouds move, shift shape, and drift away. Yet the sky itself remains open and unchanged. In a similar way, thoughts pass across the space of consciousness. Some thoughts are light and hopeful, while others are heavy with fear or doubt. Some arrive suddenly and vanish quickly, while others linger for longer periods. But just as the sky is not the clouds, the awareness observing your thoughts is not the thoughts themselves. The mind produces the clouds, but you are the sky in which they appear. Understanding this difference between the mind and awareness changes the entire relationship you have with your inner world. When a person believes they are their thoughts, they become trapped inside the patterns of the mind. If the mind generates worry, the person feels consumed by worry. If the mind generates self-criticism, the person begins to believe they are flawed. Because the observer is unconsciously identified with the projector of thoughts, every image produced by the mind feels like an absolute reality. Life becomes a series of emotional reactions to the stories the mind continuously tells. However, when awareness recognizes itself as the observer, a new freedom appears. Thoughts can still arise, but they no longer have the same authority. Instead of automatically believing every idea that appears, the observer can examine it. A thought of fear can be noticed without immediately accepting it as truth. A memory of failure can be seen as a past experience rather than a permanent definition of identity. This simple shift creates space between consciousness and the mental patterns that once controlled it. The mind then becomes more like a projector displaying images on a screen. The images may appear vivid and convincing, yet they remain projections created by internal patterns of memory, belief, and imagination. When the observer forgets their role, these projections seem completely real. But when awareness remembers its position behind the projector, it begins to see that the images are not fixed facts. They are interpretations generated by the mind. Some of those interpretations may be useful, while others may no longer serve the direction you wish your life to move. This realization has profound implications for how reality unfolds. If you believe every projection of the mind, then the mind determines your experience automatically. A thought suggesting that an opportunity will fail may cause hesitation. Hesitation leads to inaction, and inaction produces the very result the mind predicted. The projection becomes self-fulfilling. Yet when the observer recognizes the projection as only one possible interpretation, they gain the freedom to choose a different response. Instead of withdrawing, they may act with curiosity. Instead of expecting failure, they may explore the possibility of success. This new behavior changes the interaction with reality and opens pathways that once remained hidden. The mind itself is not an enemy in this process. It is a powerful tool designed to analyze information, imagine possibilities, and remember past experiences. The difficulty arises when the mind operates without the guidance of conscious awareness. When old fears and assumptions run automatically, they continue projecting the same patterns again and again. The observer becomes lost inside the movie being projected. But when awareness steps back and observes the process clearly, the projector can be guided rather than obeyed. Through conscious observation, the images displayed by the mind gradually change. Instead of replaying scenes of past limitation, the mind can begin imagining new possibilities. Instead of focusing exclusively on threats, the mind can learn to recognize opportunity. The projector still functions, but the film being shown becomes different. Awareness selects which thoughts deserve attention and which can simply pass without shaping action. This shift does not occur instantly. The mind has practiced certain patterns for many years, and those patterns do not disappear overnight. Yet every moment of conscious observation weakens the automatic grip of old stories. Each time you notice a thought, rather than immediately believing it, you strengthen the position of the observer. Over time, the observer becomes more stable, and the projections of the mind become easier to guide. As this awareness grows, the mind becomes a creative instrument rather than a source of confusion. Imagination can be used intentionally to explore new possibilities. Thoughts can become tools that support growth rather than barriers that reinforce limitation. The observer stands behind the projector, directing which images receive energy and which fade away. In this way, the mind and consciousness begin working together. The mind generates ideas, image, and interpretations, while awareness chooses which of those creations align with the direction you wish to move. Reality then responds not only to the automatic patterns of the mind, but to the intentional guidance of the observer. When you remember that you are the awareness behind the thoughts, a powerful shift occurs. The mind is no longer the master of your experience. It becomes a screen upon which possibilities appear. The true center of identity rests in the consciousness observing the projections. From that position, the stories shaping your life can gradually change. The projector continues displaying images, but now the observer is awake, guiding the film toward a future that reflects greater clarity, intention, and possibility. For most people, prayer has been taught as a request directed towards something outside themselves. When life becomes uncertain, they ask for guidance. When pain appears, they ask for relief. When dreams feel distant, they ask for help bringing those dreams closer. In this traditional view, prayer becomes a form of asking, hoping that a greater power will eventually respond. Yet hidden within this approach is a subtle contradiction. Every time a person asks for something, they reinforce the idea that what they desire is not yet present. The emotional signal beneath the request becomes one of lack. The mind focuses on absence. The heart feels separation, and the state of consciousness remains aligned with the experience of not having. The deeper understanding of prayer moves in the opposite direction. Instead of asking for something to arrive in the future, true prayer begins by entering the emotional reality of the wish already fulfilled. It is not a request for a different life, but a shift into the feeling of already living that life. When someone embodies the emotional state of fulfillment, their entire relationship with reality changes. They are no longer waiting for proof before allowing themselves to feel gratitude, confidence, or peace. They begin feeling those qualities now, even before external circumstances have fully transformed. This idea may seem unusual at first because the human mind is conditioned to believe that emotions must follow evidence. People assume they can only feel grateful once success appears, only feel confident once a goal has been achieved, only feel secure once uncertainty disappears. Yet the deeper principle behind prayer suggests the opposite order. Feeling becomes the seed, and experience becomes the reflection. When the emotional atmosphere within consciousness changes, the patterns of thought, perception, and behavior begin changing with it. These changes influence how a person interacts with opportunities and challenges, gradually shaping the external results that follow. The phrase "feeling of the wish fulfilled" describes this shift perfectly. Instead of imagining the process of getting what you want, you imagine the emotional state of already having it. What does it feel like to live with the peace you seek? What does it feel like to experience the love you desire? What does it feel like to wake each morning with the sense that your life is aligned with your purpose? When the mind enters these questions sincerely, the body begins responding to the imagined experience as if it were real. The nervous system cannot fully distinguish between a vividly imagined emotional reality and a physically present one. As a result, the feelings associated with fulfillment begin appearing within the present moment. These feelings influence more than mood. They reshape the entire internal environment of the mind. Gratitude softens the tension created by constant striving. Confidence encourages action where hesitation once existed. Calm expectation replaces the restless urgency that often accompanies desire. When these emotional states become familiar, they influence decisions in subtle ways. A person who feels aligned with success approaches opportunities differently than someone who feels desperate for it. A person who feels worthy of love interacts with others differently than someone who feels they must prove their value. This shift explains why prayer as begging often leads to frustration. When someone repeatedly asks for what they want while emotionally feeling the absence of it, they strengthen the pattern of lack. Their attention returns again and again to the gap between their current life and their desired future. Over time, that gap becomes the dominant emotional experience. The more they focus on what is missing, the more real the absence appears. Prayer, as the feeling of the wish fulfilled, works differently because it closes the emotional distance between desire and experience. The person no longer stands outside their dream asking for it. They step into the emotional atmosphere of that dream and begin living from it internally. Even if external circumstances have not yet changed, the inner state begins reflecting the reality they wish to create. This does not require ignoring the present or pretending that challenges do not exist. Instead, it requires understanding that the emotional future you seek can begin now. A person can feel gratitude before the achievement appears. A person can feel peace before the conflict fully resolves. A person can feel confidence before the outcome is certain. These feelings become signals guiding perception and behavior toward possibilities that support them. Over time, the mind becomes familiar with the emotional landscape of the desired future. Thoughts naturally move in directions consistent with that landscape. Attention begins noticing opportunities that match the new orientation. Actions gradually align with the identity that the feeling represents. What once existed only as imagination slowly gathers the conditions necessary to become experience. Many people discover that the most powerful moments of prayer occur when words are no longer necessary. Silence replaces explanation. Instead of speaking requests, the individual rests in the feeling that something meaningful is already unfolding. Gratitude arises not as a reaction to evidence, but as a recognition that life is moving in alignment with deeper possibilities. When prayer becomes this emotional alignment, it transforms from a moment of asking into a state of being. The individual no longer approaches life as someone trying to convince reality to change. They approach life as someone already connected to the reality they desire. Their thoughts, emotions, and expectations begin moving in harmony with that vision. In this sense, prayer is not an attempt to persuade the universe. It is the practice of becoming internally consistent with the life you wish to experience. The feeling of fulfillment becomes the signal that guides perception, shapes behavior, and gradually organizes circumstances around a new pattern. Instead of pleading for the future to arrive, you begin living as though the deeper movement of life is already responding. True prayer, therefore, begins not with words but with feeling. It is the quiet decision to inhabit the emotional state that reflects your highest possibility. From that state, the mind becomes clearer, actions become more aligned, and reality begins reflecting the change that first appeared within consciousness. To understand why the feeling of the wish fulfilled is so powerful, we must examine what happens when people approach life from the opposite direction. When someone prays from a place of pleading, they unintentionally strengthen the emotional experience of separation. The words of the prayer may express hope, yet the feeling beneath those words often carries the message that what is desired is still missing. The mind focuses on the distance between the present moment and the future dream. The heart feels the weight of not having. The entire state of being becomes organized around absence rather than fulfillment. This is why begging rarely produces the transformation people hope for. Every request that comes from desperation quietly confirms the belief that the desired reality is still far away. The person repeats the prayer again and again, yet each repetition strengthens the emotional pattern of waiting. The more they ask, the more they feel that something important has not yet arrived. Over time, the mind becomes trained to experience life as a series of unfulfilled expectations. The prayer becomes a cycle of longing rather than a doorway into change. Embodiment works in the opposite direction. Instead of focusing on what is missing, embodiment begins by entering the emotional atmosphere of what is already complete. The person no longer stands outside the desired experience asking for permission to receive it. They step into the identity of the person who already lives that experience. This shift may appear subtle, yet its effect on consciousness is profound. The attention moves away from absence and begins resting in presence. The emotional state begins reflecting fulfillment rather than lack. When the mind adopts this orientation, a new form of alignment begins to appear. Thoughts that once circled around fear or limitation gradually lose their intensity. They are replaced by ideas that support the identity being embodied. If someone begins embodying the feeling of confidence, their mind naturally starts exploring actions consistent with confidence. If they embody gratitude, their attention becomes sensitive to moments of progress and possibility. The inner environment reorganizes itself around the emotional signal being sustained. This process creates coherence between thought, feeling, and expectation. Coherence is the condition in which different aspects of consciousness move in the same direction rather than contradicting each other. In many people, these elements are fragmented. The mind may imagine success while the emotions anticipate failure. The words may express hope while the deeper beliefs expect disappointment. Such contradictions weaken the signal sent into life because they create mixed messages within consciousness itself. Embodiment removes these contradictions by aligning identity with intention. When someone truly feels the reality of a desired outcome, their thoughts, emotions, and expectations begin cooperating rather than competing. The mind stops searching for reasons why the dream might fail and instead begins exploring how it might unfold. The body relaxes into a state of confidence rather than tension. Actions become more decisive because they emerge from a clear internal orientation. This coherence changes how a person interacts with the world around them. Opportunities that once felt intimidating begin to appear approachable. Conversations become more open and authentic because the individual no longer carries the silent fear of rejection. Creative ideas emerge more easily because the mind is no longer occupied with constant self-doubt. None of these shifts require external circumstances to change first. They arise from the internal state of alignment created through embodiment. The external world gradually begins reflecting this new orientation. When someone approaches life with calm confidence, people respond differently. When someone expresses gratitude, others feel more comfortable offering support. When someone acts from the expectation that progress is possible, they persist longer in the face of obstacles. These behavioral changes influence relationships, opportunities, and outcomes in ways that appear almost coincidental. Yet beneath the surface, they are the natural result of the inner coherence the person has cultivated. It is important to recognize that embodiment is not the same as pretending. Pretending involves denying what is currently felt and forcing artificial emotions that the mind does not truly accept. Embodiment is different because it arises from a conscious decision to inhabit the emotional reality of possibility, even while external evidence is still unfolding. The person acknowledges the present circumstances but chooses not to let those circumstances define the limits of their identity. Through this practice, the emotional distance between desire and experience begins to dissolve. The individual no longer feels like someone who is waiting to become successful, loved, or fulfilled. They begin experiencing themselves as someone already aligned with those qualities. This internal shift removes the sense of separation that once dominated their prayers. Instead of calling toward a distant future, they begin living from the atmosphere of that future in the present moment. When this state becomes familiar, the signal sent into life becomes remarkably clear. Reality responds more easily to coherence than to contradiction. The more consistently a person embodies the feeling of fulfillment, the more naturally their actions and decisions support that fulfillment. Circumstances gradually reorganize around the identity being expressed. This is why the difference between begging and embodiment matters so deeply. Begging focuses attention on what is missing and strengthens the emotional experience of lack. Embodiment focuses attention on the reality of fulfillment and strengthens the alignment that allows that fulfillment to appear. One approach keeps the individual waiting outside their dream. The other invites them to step into the identity that naturally attracts the experiences they seek. In the end, the universe does not respond most strongly to requests made in desperation. It responds to the clarity of the state a person consistently lives from. When the feeling of fulfillment becomes real within consciousness, the external world begins reflecting that inner alignment in ways that once seemed impossible. To understand why embodiment transforms reality more effectively than begging, we must explore the role of emotion within the creative process. Many people assume that thoughts alone determine the direction of their lives. They believe that if they think positively often enough, their circumstances will eventually change. While thought is important, it is only part of the equation. Thought sets the direction of intention, but emotion provides the energy that carries that intention into experience. Without emotional energy, thoughts remain weak signals that rarely influence the deeper patterns of perception and behavior. Every thought you hold sends a subtle message into your awareness, but the emotional state attached to that thought determines how powerful the message becomes. A person may think about success for a moment, but if the feeling beneath that thought is doubt, the signal becomes confused. The mind imagines progress while the emotions quietly expect disappointment. In this situation, the thought has direction but lacks the emotional force needed to reshape perception and action. The stronger emotional pattern usually dominates because emotion engages the body, the nervous system, and the deeper layers of belief. Emotion can be understood as energy in motion. When a feeling moves through the body, it activates physical responses, influences attention, and shapes the way information is processed. Joy expands awareness and encourages exploration. Fear narrows attention and prepares the body for protection. Gratitude opens the mind to recognizing support and opportunity. Resentment focuses attention on perceived injustice and reinforces defensive reactions. These emotional states influence not only how a person feels, but also what they notice and how they respond to the world around them. Because emotion carries such influence, it acts like a frequency code that communicates with the environment. When someone consistently lives in a state of worry, their mind searches for signs that confirm the presence of danger or instability. When someone lives with a sense of appreciation, they naturally notice moments of beauty, cooperation, and progress that might otherwise be overlooked. The external world may contain both signals at the same time, yet emotion determines which signals receive attention and meaning. This is why the combination of thought and feeling is essential for meaningful transformation. Thought alone may imagine a desired future, but emotion brings that future to life within consciousness. When someone not only thinks about success but also feels the satisfaction and confidence associated with it, their internal environment begins reflecting the reality they wish to experience. The body responds as if the possibility were already unfolding. The nervous system shifts from tension toward openness. The mind becomes more receptive to ideas and opportunities aligned with that emotional state. Consider the difference between thinking about gratitude and actually feeling grateful. The thought of gratitude may appear briefly in the mind and then disappear, yet genuine gratitude produces a noticeable shift in the body. The breath becomes deeper, the muscles relax, attention expands beyond immediate problems. In this state, perception becomes more balanced and creative solutions become easier to recognize. Gratitude does not merely change mood, it changes the way the mind interacts with the world. Emotion therefore acts as the amplifier of thought. When a thought is supported by a strong emotional state, the signal becomes coherent and powerful. When the emotional state contradicts the thought, the signal weakens or becomes fragmented. Many people experience frustration because they attempt to transform their lives through mental repetition while their emotional habits remain unchanged. They repeat positive statements while feeling anxious, doubtful, or discouraged. The mind moves in one direction while the emotional body pulls in another. True alignment occurs when thought and emotion move together. The mind imagines a possibility, and the heart feels the reality of that possibility. When this coherence appears, the body begins acting in ways consistent with the new identity being formed. Confidence encourages initiative. Gratitude invites cooperation. Calm expectation replaces restless urgency. These emotional signals influence how others respond, how opportunities are recognized, and how challenges are approached. It is also important to understand that emotions are not enemies that must be suppressed. Every emotion carries information about how the mind is interpreting experience. Fear may signal perceived threat. Frustration may signal blocked expectation. Sadness may signal loss or unmet connection. Observing these emotions without judgment allows awareness to understand the patterns shaping perception. Once recognized, those patterns can gradually be redirected toward more supportive states. Developing the ability to guide emotion requires patience and practice. Emotional habits often develop over many years, reinforced by repeated experiences and interpretations. However, each moment of conscious attention offers the opportunity to shift the internal atmosphere. When someone deliberately cultivates appreciation, curiosity, or hope, they introduce new emotional signals into the system. Repeated often enough, these signals begin forming new patterns within the mind and body. As these patterns strengthen, the frequency code being broadcast into life changes as well. Instead of constantly transmitting signals of doubt or struggle, the individual begins expressing coherence and possibility. This shift influences how situations are perceived and how choices are made. Opportunities once ignored become visible. Creative responses replace automatic reactions. The field of experience gradually reorganizes around the new emotional orientation. Thought points toward the destination, but emotion fuels the journey. When both elements align, they form a powerful signal capable of reshaping perception, behavior, and ultimately experience. The mind provides the blueprint of the future you wish to create, and emotion supplies the energy that brings that blueprint to life within consciousness. Understanding this relationship reveals why the feeling of the wish fulfilled is central to true prayer and manifestation. When the mind imagines a possibility and the heart genuinely feels its reality, the signal becomes complete. The direction of thought and the power of emotion move together. In that coherence, the invisible patterns of potential begin organizing themselves into the experiences that gradually appear in the visible world. To understand how emotion shapes reality, it helps to imagine that emotional states exist on a spectrum rather than appearing randomly. Some emotions contract awareness and narrow perception, while others expand awareness and open the mind to possibility. These emotional states can be seen as levels along a scale, and the level a person lives in most consistently becomes the frequency through which they interact with life. At the lower end of the scale, emotions such as shame, guilt, fear, and deep anxiety dominate attention. These states focus the mind on survival and protection. The body tightens, breathing becomes shallow, and awareness narrows toward potential threats. When someone lives primarily in this state, the world appears unpredictable and dangerous. Opportunities become difficult to recognize because the mind is occupied with avoiding risk. Slightly above these emotions are states such as frustration, anger, and resentment. These feelings carry more energy than fear, but they still maintain a focus on conflict and resistance. Anger may push a person into action, yet that action is often driven by opposition rather than creative vision. A mind operating within this range of emotion tends to interpret events as battles that must be fought. Attention remains directed toward what is wrong, unfair, or broken. While this level of emotion may produce movement, it rarely produces lasting clarity because the underlying focus remains centered on struggle. As emotional states continue rising along the scale, a significant turning point begins to appear. This point often arrives through emotions such as courage, willingness, and acceptance. Courage does not mean the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite uncertainty. When a person enters this emotional level, the mind begins shifting from avoidance toward possibility. Instead of asking how to escape difficulty, the individual asks how to learn from it. This change in orientation expands perception. New solutions begin appearing because attention is no longer locked into defensive patterns. Beyond this turning point, the emotional landscape changes even more dramatically. Feelings such as appreciation, gratitude, inspiration, and joy begin emerging. These emotions open the mind rather than closing it. When gratitude is present, attention naturally searches for what is working rather than what is missing. The nervous system relaxes and creative thinking becomes easier. Relationships often improve because the emotional atmosphere surrounding interaction becomes more welcoming and cooperative. Opportunities that once felt distant begin appearing more reachable because the mind is no longer overwhelmed by the weight of doubt. At the highest levels of the emotional scale, emotions such as love, compassion, and deep inner peace become dominant. These states create a profound sense of connection with life itself. When love is present, perception expands far beyond individual concerns. The person begins seeing the shared humanity within others and the interconnected nature of experience. This emotional state supports patience, creativity, and resilience. Challenges may still appear, but they are interpreted as temporary aspects of a larger journey rather than permanent obstacles. Understanding the emotional scale is not about judging certain feelings as good and others as bad. Every emotion has a purpose and can provide valuable information about how the mind is interpreting experience. Fear can alert us to genuine danger. Anger can signal that boundaries need attention. Sadness can reveal the importance of connection and meaning. The key insight is not to eliminate these emotions, but to recognize when they dominate the internal environment for long periods of time. When lower states remain constant, they shape perception in ways that limit awareness of possibility. The process of emotional transformation therefore begins with awareness. Instead of unconsciously reacting to every feeling, you begin noticing where your emotional state tends to settle most often. Do you frequently return to worry about the future? Do you interpret events through disappointment or frustration? Or do you find yourself naturally moving toward curiosity, appreciation, and trust? Simply recognizing these patterns creates the first step toward change. Shifting along the emotional scale rarely happens instantly. The mind cannot move directly from deep fear to unconditional love in a single step. Transformation usually occurs gradually as awareness introduces slightly more expansive states of feeling. A person who has been overwhelmed by anxiety may begin by cultivating moments of calm breathing or simple acceptance. Someone who has been living with frustration may experiment with curiosity about new possibilities. These small movements upward on the emotional scale create subtle but meaningful shifts in perception. Gratitude often serves as one of the most powerful gateways for this shift. Unlike many emotions, gratitude can be intentionally practiced even when circumstances are imperfect. By deliberately noticing moments of support, beauty, or progress, the mind begins training itself to recognize positive patterns within experience. The body responds to this practice by relaxing tension and allowing clearer thinking. Over time, gratitude becomes more natural, and the emotional baseline begins rising. As the emotional baseline rises, perception of reality changes as well. What once appeared impossible begins to feel achievable. Conversations that once felt intimidating become opportunities for connection. Problems that once seemed overwhelming reveal manageable steps toward resolution. The external world may not have changed dramatically, yet the internal orientation toward that world becomes far more expansive. This is why emotional alignment plays such a central role in the creative process of life. The level of emotion you consistently embody becomes the frequency through which you interact with the field of possibilities around you. Lower emotions focus attention on limitation and reinforce defensive behavior. Higher emotions expand awareness and encourage exploration of new pathways. Over time, these emotional patterns shape the experiences that unfold. Moving upward along the emotional scale is not about forcing happiness or denying difficult moments. It is about gradually learning how to guide attention toward states that support clarity, resilience, and connection. Each step upward creates a broader perspective and invites new forms of experience. When gratitude and love become familiar emotional homes, the signal you send into life changes profoundly. The world begins responding to a different frequency, one that invites growth, creativity, and deeper harmony. One of the most powerful ways to align thought and emotion is through a practice known as mental rehearsal. Most people already rehearse experiences every day without realizing it. The mind naturally imagines future situations, remembers past events, and constructs possible outcomes long before they happen in the physical world. Unfortunately, many of these rehearsals focus on fear rather than possibility. A person imagines failure before beginning a project. They replay conversations that might go wrong. They mentally repeat memories of past disappointment. These unconscious rehearsals train the mind and body to expect the same results again. Over time, the brain becomes familiar with the emotional patterns of worry, hesitation, and self-doubt. Mental rehearsal can be used in a completely different way. Instead of repeatedly imagining negative outcomes, a person can consciously practice the emotional and psychological experience of the future they wish to create. This practice does not simply involve visualizing success as a distant dream. It involves stepping into the emotional atmosphere of that success as if it were already unfolding. When someone mentally rehearses a desired reality with vivid detail and genuine feeling, the mind begins forming new patterns of expectation. The body responds as though the experience is real, even before it appears physically. Athletes have used mental rehearsal for decades to improve performance. Before competitions, many athletes close their eyes and imagine every movement of their routine in precise detail. They visualize the rhythm of their breathing, the movement of their muscles, the sound of the environment around them, and the feeling of confidence within their body. Research has shown that when these mental rehearsals are vivid enough, the brain activates many of the same neural pathways used during the actual performance. In other words, the body begins learning the experience before it physically occurs. This same principle can be applied to any area of life. When you repeatedly imagine the emotional reality of the future you desire, the mind begins accepting that reality as possible. Instead of feeling unfamiliar or distant, the experience becomes something the nervous system recognizes. The fear of the unknown decreases because the mind has already practiced living within that future scenario. Confidence grows not through blind belief, but through repeated familiarity with the feeling of success. Mental rehearsal works because the brain does not clearly distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one when strong emotion is involved. When someone imagines a meaningful moment with clarity and emotional depth, the body responds with the same physiological changes that would occur during the actual event. The heart rate may shift, breathing patterns adjust, and the nervous system enters the emotional state connected with the imagined scene. Over time, these rehearsals condition the body to feel comfortable within that emotional landscape. Consider someone who dreams of speaking confidently in front of others, but feels intense anxiety whenever the opportunity appears. If that person repeatedly imagines themselves standing calmly before an audience, feeling relaxed, speaking clearly, and receiving positive response from listeners, Their nervous system gradually becomes familiar with that scenario. Each rehearsal reduces the emotional shock associated with the experience. When the real moment arrives, the mind recognizes the situation rather than reacting with complete uncertainty. The same approach can be used for personal growth, relationships, creative work, or any meaningful goal. Instead of focusing on the long process required to reach a result, mental rehearsal focuses on the emotional state of already living that result. A person who desires a fulfilling career may imagine waking each morning feeling energized by meaningful work. Someone seeking healthier relationships may imagine conversations filled with honesty, respect, and connection. The key is not simply to picture the event, but to feel the emotional atmosphere surrounding it. This feeling becomes the bridge between imagination and reality. When the emotional state of the desired future becomes familiar, the mind begins guiding behavior in ways that support that future. Decisions change. Opportunities become easier to recognize. Actions become more aligned with the identity being practiced during the rehearsal. What once felt like a distant dream begins appearing as a natural extension of who the person is becoming. It is important to approach mental rehearsal with consistency rather than intensity alone. A single moment of visualization may inspire temporary excitement, but repeated practice gradually rewires the patterns of thought and emotion. Spending a few minutes each day imagining the reality you wish to experience can slowly reshape how your mind interprets the world. Each rehearsal strengthens the connection between intention and emotion. During these moments, the mind should not focus on how the future will unfold step by step. The purpose of mental rehearsal is not to control every detail of the journey, but to embody the destination emotionally. The mind often becomes trapped, trying to predict every obstacle or calculate every strategy. Instead, the rehearsal focuses on the experience of already arriving. What does it feel like to live within that new reality? What emotions arise naturally when the goal has already been reached? As these emotional rehearsals continue, the identity of the individual begins shifting. Instead of seeing themselves as someone struggling to reach a distant outcome, they begin experiencing themselves as someone already aligned with that outcome. The mind no longer approaches life from the position of lack. It approaches life from the perspective of possibility and familiarity. Through mental rehearsal, the future stops being an abstract idea and becomes an emotional reality practiced in the present moment. The brain learns the rhythm of the desired life before the external circumstances fully appear. Thoughts and emotions begin cooperating with intention rather than resisting it. In this way, imagination becomes a training ground for the reality you are preparing to enter. Each rehearsal strengthens the alignment between your inner world and the experiences waiting to unfold in the outer world. Mental rehearsal is powerful, but its effectiveness depends on how it is practiced. Many people hear the idea of visualization and assume that simply imagining success occasionally will transform their lives. They close their eyes for a moment, picture a positive outcome, and expect immediate change. When the external world does not respond instantly, they conclude that the method does not work. The truth is that mental rehearsal is not a brief act of fantasy. It is a process of conditioning the mind and body to become familiar with a new identity. When practiced correctly, it reshapes emotional patterns, perception, and behavior over time. The first element that makes mental rehearsal effective is clarity. The mind responds more strongly to a specific scene than to a vague idea. Instead of imagining success in general terms, it is more powerful to imagine a clear moment that would naturally occur if the desired reality had already arrived. For example, someone who wants to build a meaningful career might imagine the moment of completing a project they feel proud of, receiving appreciation from others, or feeling satisfied at the end of a productive day. The mind understands concrete experiences more easily than abstract goals. When the imagined moment is vivid, the brain can connect with it emotionally. The second important element is sensory detail. The more senses involved in the rehearsal, the more real the experience becomes to the mind. Imagine not only what the scene looks like, but also what it sounds like, how the environment feels, what emotions move through the body in that moment. When sensory detail is present, the brain activates neural pathways similar to those used in real experiences. This strengthens the connection between imagination and emotional response. The third element is emotional authenticity. The rehearsal becomes effective when the feeling of the desired experience is genuine rather than forced. If someone imagines success while simultaneously feeling doubt, the signal becomes mixed. The mind sends one message through thought and another through emotion. Instead of trying to force excitement, it is often better to begin with emotions that feel believable: calm confidence, curiosity, or quiet gratitude may be easier starting points than overwhelming excitement. As the practice continues, the emotional connection gradually deepens. Consistency also plays a crucial role in mental rehearsal. The brain forms patterns through repetition. Practicing the imagined experience regularly allows the nervous system to become familiar with the emotional atmosphere of the desired future. Just as physical training strengthens muscles through repeated movement, mental rehearsal strengthens neural pathways through repeated visualization and feeling. A few minutes of focused practice each day can gradually reshape how the mind anticipates and responds to opportunities. While these elements strengthen the practice, there are also several common mistakes that weaken its effect. One of the most frequent mistakes is passive daydreaming. Passive daydreaming occurs when someone imagines a pleasant future but remains emotionally detached from it. The images appear briefly and disappear without engaging the deeper emotional system. In this situation, the rehearsal remains superficial. The mind treats it as entertainment rather than preparation for real experience. Another mistake is focusing on the process of getting the desire rather than the experience of already having it. Many people imagine themselves working hard, struggling, or hoping to reach the outcome someday. While effort is often necessary in real life, mental rehearsal becomes more powerful when it focuses on the emotional reality of the result itself. The mind needs to experience the destination rather than constantly rehearsing the journey toward it. A third mistake occurs when someone imagines the desired future but immediately reminds themselves that it is not yet real. For example, a person may visualize a meaningful relationship but then think about their current loneliness. They may imagine success but quickly remember past failures. These thoughts interrupt the emotional continuity of the rehearsal. Instead of strengthening belief, they reinforce doubt. Effective rehearsal requires allowing the imagined scene to feel complete during the moment of practice, without constantly comparing it to present circumstances. Inconsistency is another challenge. Many people practice visualization only when they feel inspired or when circumstances become difficult. They may spend several days imagining their desired future and then abandon the practice when daily responsibilities return. Because the brain changes through repeated exposure, sporadic rehearsal rarely produces lasting results. Consistency transforms the imagined experience into a familiar mental environment. It is also important to understand that mental rehearsal does not replace action. Its purpose is to align the internal state so that actions become clearer and more confident. When the emotional atmosphere of the future becomes familiar, the mind naturally begins recognizing opportunities that support it. Decisions become easier because the identity associated with the desired reality has already been practiced internally. Mental rehearsal therefore works best when it becomes a quiet daily ritual rather than an occasional exercise. Each session strengthens the connection between imagination and emotional experience. The mind gradually accepts the possibility of the future being practiced. Fear of the unknown decreases because the unknown has already been explored within consciousness. Over time, this practice changes how the individual approaches life. Instead of reacting to circumstances with uncertainty, they begin acting from a sense of familiarity with their desired direction. Opportunities that once felt intimidating become natural steps forward. Conversations become more confident because the identity behind them has been rehearsed repeatedly. When clarity, sensory detail, emotional authenticity, and consistency come together, mental rehearsal becomes more than visualization. It becomes a method of aligning identity with possibility. The mind learns to experience the future emotionally before it arrives physically. Through this process, the gap between imagination and reality begins to close. The individual gradually becomes the person whose life reflects the very scenes once practiced within their own awareness. One of the most difficult moments in any process of transformation appears in the space between intention and visible result. A person may begin practicing new ways of thinking, feeling, and imagining their future. Yet the external world does not change immediately. Days pass, sometimes weeks or months, and life may appear almost the same as before. In this period, doubt often begins to appear. The mind asks whether the effort is meaningful or whether nothing is truly changing. Many people abandon their practice at this stage because they assume that if the result has not appeared quickly, the process must be failing. Yet this assumption misunderstands the nature of growth and manifestation. The space between desire and visible expression is not evidence that nothing is happening. In many cases, it is the most important part of the entire transformation. When a seed is planted in soil, it does not instantly become a tree. Beneath the surface, an invisible process begins. The seed opens slowly, roots extend into the ground, and the structure needed to support future growth forms quietly out of sight. If someone judged the success of the seed only by what they could immediately see, they might believe nothing was occurring. Yet the most important changes are happening where the eye cannot observe them. In a similar way, when a person begins aligning thought, emotion, and identity with a new possibility, an invisible reorganization begins long before the visible results appear. This period of apparent delay serves several purposes. First, it allows the internal identity of the individual to adapt to the new direction they have chosen. Many people wish for a different life while still carrying beliefs that contradict that change. For example, someone may desire success while still believing they are not capable of handling responsibility. They may seek meaningful relationships while secretly fearing vulnerability or rejection. If external change appeared instantly without the inner transformation to support it, the new circumstances might quickly collapse under the weight of those unresolved patterns. The delay provides time for identity to evolve so that the desired reality can be sustained once it appears. Second, the gap between intention and manifestation reveals hidden beliefs that might otherwise remain unnoticed. When external circumstances do not change immediately, the mind often reacts by returning to old doubts. Thoughts such as "this will never work" or "nothing ever changes for me" may arise automatically. These thoughts are not obstacles created by the universe. They are reflections of patterns that already exist within the mind. The delay allows these patterns to surface so they can be observed and gradually transformed. Without this period of exposure, many limiting beliefs would remain invisible. Another important function of the delay is that it encourages patience and emotional stability. When people become attached to immediate results, their emotional state fluctuates dramatically depending on external feedback. A small sign of progress creates excitement, while a temporary setback produces frustration or discouragement. This instability weakens the coherence needed for transformation. The waiting period invites a different relationship with desire, one based on steady alignment rather than constant emotional reaction. During this phase, the most effective approach is to continue practicing the internal state associated with the desired future without demanding instant proof. Each moment spent feeling gratitude, confidence, or calm expectation strengthens the emotional environment within the mind. Even if external evidence has not yet appeared, the internal shift continues developing. Over time, this new emotional baseline influences perception and action in subtle ways. Opportunities once overlooked become visible. Decisions begin aligning with the identity that is forming. Gradually, the external world begins reflecting the internal change. Many people misunderstand this stage because they interpret the absence of immediate results as rejection. In reality, delay rarely means denial. More often, it indicates that multiple elements are adjusting simultaneously. The mind is reshaping its expectations. The body is adapting to new emotional patterns, and life circumstances are reorganizing around the choices and actions that follow. These processes require time, just as any form of growth does. Consider how learning a new skill unfolds. At first, the mind understands the concept intellectually, but the body has not yet integrated the movement or behavior required to express it. Through repetition, the nervous system gradually becomes comfortable with the new pattern. Eventually, the skill feels natural and automatic. The same principle applies to emotional and psychological transformation. What begins as a conscious practice gradually becomes a familiar way of being. During the gap between desire and manifestation, it is helpful to shift attention away from measuring external progress every day. Instead, the focus can move towards strengthening the internal alignment that will support the desired outcome. Each time you return to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you reinforce the identity connected with that future. Each time you observe doubt without allowing it to dominate your state of being, you strengthen the role of the observer, guiding your consciousness. The waiting period then becomes a stage of preparation rather than frustration. Instead of asking why the result has not appeared yet, you begin noticing how your perception, emotional stability, and clarity of intention are evolving. These changes often occur quietly, but they shape every interaction you have with the world. Eventually, there comes a moment when the internal and external conditions align. What once existed only as possibility begins appearing as experience. Opportunities emerge, relationships shift, or circumstances change in ways that reflect the transformation already established within the individual. From the outside, this moment may appear sudden, yet in reality, it is the natural outcome of the invisible work that occurred during the period of waiting. The gap between desire and manifestation is therefore not empty space. It is a bridge connecting intention with reality. Every thought aligned with possibility places another stone along that bridge. Every emotional state of trust strengthens the path forward. Delay does not mean that life has ignored your intention. Often it means that life is preparing the conditions through which your intention can fully unfold. Once you understand that the space between intention and manifestation is not failure but preparation, a new question naturally arises. If the gap exists, how can it become shorter? How can the movement from possibility to reality become more fluid and natural? The answer lies in a shift that many people initially find difficult to accept. Instead of chasing the result, you begin living from the result. Instead of asking when the change will arrive, you step into the emotional state of the change as though it is already unfolding. This practice is often described as living in the end. Living in the end means allowing your inner world to experience the completion of the desire before the outer world fully reflects it. It does not mean pretending that circumstances are different from what they are. It means recognizing that the emotional state connected with the fulfilled reality can exist right now. When someone wants peace, they usually believe they must solve every problem before they can feel calm. When someone wants success, they often believe they must achieve visible results before they can feel confident. Yet this order can be reversed. Calm can be practiced before every problem disappears. Confidence can exist before external evidence becomes obvious. When the emotional result appears first, the physical expression often follows more naturally. This shift works because attention and identity begin organizing around the reality you are embodying internally. When someone constantly thinks about how their desire will arrive, they remain focused on the distance between where they are and where they want to be. The mind becomes trapped in calculation. It searches for the perfect strategy, the exact sequence of events, the precise moment when success will appear. While planning can be useful, this constant focus on how often strengthens the feeling that the outcome is still far away. The more the mind tries to control every detail, the more it reinforces the sense of separation from the desired future. Releasing the how does not mean abandoning action or responsibility. It means allowing the path toward the desired reality to unfold through a combination of intention, awareness, and openness rather than rigid control. The mind sets a direction through thought and emotion, but the unfolding of events often includes opportunities that could never have been predicted in advance. When someone is overly attached to one specific route, they may miss the unexpected paths that appear naturally along the journey. Living in the end also transforms how you experience the waiting period. Instead of seeing the waiting as an empty gap, you begin experiencing it as part of the unfolding process. Each day becomes an opportunity to strengthen the emotional state connected with the fulfilled reality. Gratitude becomes easier to feel because the mind is no longer measuring progress only through external evidence. Appreciation can arise simply from the recognition that life is already moving in alignment with deeper intention. This is what it means to bless the waiting. The period before visible change appears is not treated as a problem to endure, but as a stage of growth to appreciate. During this time, the inner qualities that support the desired life become stronger. Patience develops. Emotional stability deepens. Confidence becomes less dependent on temporary circumstances. These qualities make it possible for the future you desire to exist without constant fear of losing it. Blessing the waiting also removes the emotional pressure that often slows transformation. When someone desperately demands immediate results, the nervous system enters a state of tension. Every day becomes a test of whether success has arrived. Each moment without evidence feels like failure. This pressure creates internal resistance because the mind becomes focused on what has not happened rather than what is gradually unfolding. When the waiting period is accepted with calm, trust the emotional environment becomes more relaxed and coherent. In this relaxed state, perception becomes clearer. Opportunities that might have been overlooked during periods of anxiety begin to appear. Conversations take unexpected directions. Creative ideas arise naturally because the mind is no longer preoccupied with constant urgency. These small shifts accumulate over time and often lead to the very outcomes that once seemed distant. Living in the end therefore becomes a daily practice rather than a single moment of inspiration. Each morning offers the opportunity to reconnect with the emotional reality of the life you wish to experience. Each interaction with others becomes a chance to express the qualities of that identity. Instead of waiting for life to provide proof, you begin living as though the deeper direction of your life is already established. This practice does not eliminate effort or remove challenges. Rather, it changes the spirit in which effort occurs. Actions arise from alignment instead of desperation. Decisions emerge from clarity instead of fear. The mind stops fighting against the present moment and begins cooperating with the possibilities contained within it. Over time, this orientation has a powerful effect on the unfolding of experience. Because attention remains connected to the fulfilled state, the gap between intention and manifestation becomes smaller. Opportunities are recognized more quickly. Choices align more naturally with long-term vision. The process that once seemed slow begins accelerating because internal resistance has been reduced. Collapsing time does not mean forcing reality to move faster than it naturally can. It means removing the internal tension that stretches the distance between desire and experience. When the mind lives in the emotional reality of the result and releases the need to control every step, the path becomes clearer. Life begins responding with synchronicities and possibilities that align with the direction of consciousness. In this way, the waiting period becomes part of the miracle rather than a delay in it. The person is no longer standing outside the desired life asking when it will begin. They are already living within the emotional landscape of that life, while the visible world gradually arranges itself around that inner truth. Understanding the principles of consciousness and manifestation is valuable, but transformation becomes real only when those principles are practiced consistently in daily life. Knowledge alone rarely changes experience unless it is supported by rhythm and repetition. Just as the body grows stronger through regular movement, the mind and emotional system become aligned through repeated states of awareness. This is where daily rituals of quantum prayer become important. A ritual in this sense is not a rigid religious rule. It is a conscious pattern of attention that helps the mind return again and again to the emotional and psychological state that supports the life you are creating. The purpose of these rituals is simple. They help synchronize the mind that thinks, the heart that feels, and the invisible field of possibilities that surrounds every moment of experience. When thought and emotion move in harmony, the signal sent into life becomes coherent and clear. When they are fragmented, the signal becomes weak and contradictory. Daily practices provide the structure needed to bring these elements into alignment. One of the most effective rituals begins at the start of the day. The first moments after waking often set the emotional direction for the entire day. Instead of immediately turning attention toward problems, message, or responsibilities, the mind can spend a few minutes connecting with the emotional reality of the future you wish to experience. During this quiet moment, you may imagine yourself living with the peace, purpose, or success you are cultivating. The goal is not to analyze how the day will unfold, but to allow the body to feel the atmosphere of that future as though it were already present. This morning, alignment prepares the nervous system to interpret events through the lens of possibility rather than anxiety. Another powerful ritual involves practicing gratitude ahead of evidence. Gratitude is often treated as a reaction to something good that has already happened, but in the context of quantum prayer, it becomes a creative signal. When someone feels genuine appreciation before the desired outcome appears, they shift their emotional orientation toward fulfillment rather than lack. This does not require pretending that everything is perfect. It simply involves recognizing moments of support, progress, and connection that already exist. As gratitude becomes a regular practice, attention begins noticing opportunities and resources that previously went unnoticed. A third ritual focuses on the connection between heart and mind. Many people think of prayer as an activity of the intellect, repeating words or intentions silently in their thoughts. Yet the emotional center of the body plays an equally important role. When the heart enters a state of calm appreciation, the nervous system becomes more coherent, breathing slows, the body relaxes, and the mind becomes clearer. One simple practice involves placing attention gently on the heart area while breathing slowly and recalling a moment of genuine appreciation. As the feeling grows, you can bring to mind the possibility you are nurturing. The combination of clear intention and heartfelt emotion creates a powerful internal signal. Daily life also offers opportunities for what could be called moving prayer. Instead of limiting spiritual practice to quiet meditation moments, you can bring the state of alignment into ordinary actions. Walking, working, or speaking with others can become expressions of the identity you are embodying. If your intention is to live with confidence, you walk with calm awareness rather than rushing through the day in tension. If your intention is to cultivate kindness, you bring attentive presence into conversations. Each action reinforces the emotional reality being practiced internally. The evening offers another important opportunity for alignment. Before sleep, the mind naturally reviews the events of the day. This moment can be used intentionally rather than unconsciously replaying worries or regrets. A helpful ritual is to reflect on moments during the day that expressed progress, learning, or connection. Even small successes can be acknowledged with appreciation. By ending the day in this state, the emotional environment of the mind becomes more supportive of the intentions guiding your life. During sleep, the brain continues processing emotional patterns, and entering rest with gratitude strengthens those patterns further. These rituals may appear simple, yet their power lies in consistency. When practiced regularly, they gradually reshape the baseline emotional state of the individual. Instead of reacting automatically to every circumstance, the mind learns to return to a center of awareness and intention. Over time, this center becomes more stable. The person begins moving through life with greater calm and clarity because their internal state is no longer controlled entirely by external events. As mind and heart move together, the connection with the surrounding field of possibilities becomes stronger. Opportunities that resonate with your intentions become easier to recognize. Relationships align more naturally with the emotional qualities you express. Challenges still arise, yet they are approached with creativity rather than fear. The daily rituals do not control the universe. Instead, they refine the instrument through which you interact with it. Through these practices, prayer becomes less about speaking words and more about sustaining a state of alignment. Each moment of gratitude strengthens emotional coherence. Each visualization of possibility directs the mind toward growth. Each act of presence during the day expresses the identity being formed. Gradually, the boundary between spiritual practice and ordinary life begins to dissolve. Quantum prayer rituals therefore serve as a bridge between intention and experience. They transform abstract ideas about consciousness into living habits that shape perception and behavior. When practiced with patience, they create a rhythm in which the mind thinks with clarity, the heart feels with openness, and the surrounding field of life responds to the coherence created within. There comes a moment in the journey of understanding when prayer is no longer something you do occasionally, and it becomes something you are. At the beginning of this path, prayer may appear as a practice, a moment of reflection, a time when you close your eyes and focus your thoughts and feelings on the life you wish to experience. Yet as awareness deepens, something subtle begins to shift. The separation between the act of prayer and the way you live your life begins to disappear. Prayer stops being a short moment within the day and becomes the state from which the entire day unfolds. This is the stage where a person begins living as the prayer, rather than merely speaking it. To live as the prayer means that your thoughts, emotions, and actions consistently reflect the reality you are choosing to embody. Instead of asking life to bring you peace, you begin moving through the world with a peaceful presence. Instead of waiting for confidence to appear after success, you begin approaching life with quiet confidence even before visible results arrive. The identity you once imagined during moments of meditation slowly becomes the identity you carry into ordinary experience. In this way, the inner world and the outer world begin moving in the same direction. Many people spend years hoping that circumstances will change so that they can finally feel different inside. They believe they will feel grateful once success appears, feel secure once the future becomes certain, or feel worthy once others recognize their value. Living as the prayer reverses this pattern. The emotional state associated with the desired future is practiced first. Gratitude appears before success. Confidence exists before proof. Calm trust replaces the constant search for reassurance. When these emotional qualities become natural, the world begins reflecting them through opportunities, relationships, and experiences that match the internal orientation. Living as the prayer also transforms how you interpret events. Instead of reacting to every challenge as evidence that something is going wrong, you begin viewing life through a wider perspective. Difficult moments are no longer immediate signs of failure. They become part of the unfolding process through which growth occurs. Because your identity is anchored in the deeper direction of your life, temporary obstacles lose much of their emotional power. The mind remains steady even when circumstances fluctuate. This steadiness influences the way you interact with others. When someone lives with a calm sense of purpose, their presence naturally affects the environment around them. Conversations become more open because they are not driven by insecurity. Decisions become clearer because they are guided by intention rather than fear. People often respond to this stability with trust and respect, creating opportunities for cooperation that might not have appeared otherwise. In this way, the inner state quietly shapes the external world. Living as the prayer also requires responsibility. When you recognize that your state of being influences experience, you begin paying closer attention to the patterns you allow to dominate your mind. Thoughts of resentment or hopelessness are no longer treated as harmless habits. They are recognized as signals that shape perception and behavior. This awareness does not create pressure to be perfect. Instead, it invites conscious choice. Each moment becomes an opportunity to return to the emotional qualities that support the life you wish to express. Over time, this practice strengthens a deep sense of alignment. Instead of constantly questioning whether you are on the right path, you begin feeling that your life is moving with quiet coherence. Actions arise naturally from intention rather than from constant calculation. Decisions become simpler because they reflect the identity you have already accepted within yourself. When this alignment becomes stable, the boundary between intention and manifestation begins dissolving. From the outside, this transformation may appear mysterious. Others may see new opportunities appearing in your life, or notice that situations seem to shift in unexpected ways. What they often do not see is the internal change that preceded those results. Long before external circumstances rearranged themselves, your inner world had already moved into alignment with a new possibility. The outer reality simply followed the pattern that consciousness had established. Living as the prayer therefore represents the final stage of this journey. Prayer is no longer a request directed towards something outside you. It becomes the continuous expression of the consciousness you embody. Each thought of gratitude becomes a signal of openness. Each act of kindness becomes a reflection of connection. Each moment of calm trust becomes an invitation for life to organize itself around harmony rather than struggle. In this state, the individual no longer waits for the universe to respond. They understand that life is always responding. Reflecting the emotional and psychological orientation they consistently express. Instead of chasing outcomes, they cultivate the qualities that naturally attract those outcomes. Instead of forcing reality, they cooperate with the deeper intelligence moving through existence. To live as the prayer is to recognize that you are not separate from the creative process of life. Your awareness participates in shaping the direction of experience. Your emotions influence the lens through which the world appears. Your actions extend that inner orientation into the physical environment around you. When these elements move together, the individual becomes a living expression of intention rather than a passive observer of circumstance. The journey that began with a simple question about prayer ends with a profound realization. The most powerful prayer is not spoken with words alone. It is expressed through the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you walk through each moment of your life. When your state of being reflects clarity, gratitude, and possibility, you become the cause from which a different reality can emerge. Life responds to that cause naturally because the prayer is no longer a request. It has become the living truth of who you are.